There's various components here from the body that I haven't cleaned yet. We'll start with the front standard. It's quite dirty. It's quite oily. Of interest here, of course, with the front standard is trying to figure out why that button stuck at the top there. There's certainly some dirt there, and I did say that I suspected that perhaps a little bit of grit had jammed that button. That's certainly something to consider as a possibility, perhaps even a probability in this case. But all of these surfaces should be cleaned. The shutter release arm moves on this piece here, and with broad flat surfaces, not an awful lot of spring tension to return things. If the oil gets in between there, and if it's quite viscous, it will just stick those surfaces together and pieces will not move as they're intended to move. The shutter release was certainly sticking in this particular camera. I think that was mostly down to damage on the shutter mount. What's this stuff? It could have been glue. Oh, there was a hint of something discoloured on there, wasn't there? Yeah. I mean, I know that under the top cover there was a hint of something brown, like a liquid had been spilt on it. That's possible, that's what I'm seeing there. Right, that part's clean. This piece, this shroud, this is often very, very dirty, and certainly no exception to the rule. It's full of grit and grease. I mean, this gets greased anyway, and it helps it gather grit and sand and dust and hold it. Got to get rid of all of that filth. I can see I'm going to run out of cotton buds before I get to the end of this particular camera. Now this arm here, that was bent. It's still not 100%. I've got to see if I can get that straightened up better. And that was probably the cause of the shutter jamming. This is the track that the rangefinder arm travels down, so that as you stow the front of the camera, the rangefinder arm has to fold back out of the way. It needs somewhere to go. Now there's certainly some really baked on crud there. I can certainly tell that the camera's been dropped at some stage. There's a track that runs through here in the top and the bottom, and they both show a little dent about halfway down the track, and that will be where the camera's taken a thump, and this piece has been pushed sideways in here and effectively distorted that track. That just means that is, oh yeah, very, very clear indication that the camera's been dropped at some stage. which of course never does anything any good. Just put that piece back in there. Where are those marks? They're right at that point. There's something really unfortunate happened right at that point. So that was with the camera front almost closed, I'd say, but it's been dropped. It's interesting. The camera, it generally behaved pretty well, but there was certainly something odd about its opening and closing behaviour. I'll just clean around this shutter release piece there. Have another look at that. I've got my pliers here so I can just make some adjustments to this if I need to. This all should be square, and it's not square in this direction. What about in the other direction? Yeah, that looks pretty good. If that's not square, the shaft that runs down through there will just jam, and that was exactly what was happening. The shutter button was tending to stick down. Well, the inner and outer run smoothly enough together. It's coming back in. It's at the point where it folds back into the body. There's a stiffness right at that point. That's where that damage is in that track, top and bottom. I can't do anything about that. That's just the way it's going to be. It's certainly interesting. Right, that should be okay once it's all lubricated and assembled anyway. This focus scale ring. Now the focus scale ring, as soon as I lifted the focus scale ring off this camera, that front button released into the normal position. So it's possible it was catching on here. The buttons pop up in this position and that position. And it's possible that it was the piece of grit or the stickiness or whatever was causing that button to fail to move into position was something here. There's no evidence of anything now. Perhaps there once was. And again, it could have been a little bit of grit. It could have even been a film chip. Film chips are the small pieces of 35mm film between the sprocket holes that get torn out when films have been incorrectly loaded or incorrectly unloaded, or someone has not recognised they're at the end of the film and just kept forcing the winder. Honestly, don't see anything there to cause a problem, so that pop that to one side. What's we got here? This one. Well, this is the take-up spool, and I know I can clean this with naphtha, and you wouldn't want to use anything more aggressive than that because you'll just melt the plastic. This was quite sticky. You can see the dirty grease there. And the film advance shaft, of course, runs up the middle of this spool. That's fine. What other components? What's next? The front door. This looks unusually clean around these pins and around these arms. Normally they're quite dirty with old grease and dirt there. These are unusually clean, which, given the state of the rest of the camera, makes me suspect that someone's had this part out before. Probably not without good cause. Normally you don't need to do any more to the insides of these normally than blow the dust out or flick it away with a dry paintbrush. Sometimes these arms might be loose. I'll just check that those screws are tight. Don't over tighten these screws, they'll just distort and they'll be no tighter when you've finished than when you started. They're all good. Those are chrome plated, those screws. Now as it happens, they're identical to the screws that hold the accessory shoe on the top plate of a Retina IIc type camera. So if you've got a camera where those screws have been buggered up or they've been replaced with foreigners, if you get the door off, you can steal the screws from here and use the pretty screws up the top and put your ugly ones back in the door where no one could see them. That's just a wee trick for you to know. Yeah, that release button there, is that sticky? No, that feels pretty good. Okay, those components are okay. This top cover. Now normally I clean these up. I start with the accessory shoe, remove the accessory shoe because it makes it easier to clean the top cover. Pop that to one side. And here we've got the return spring for the frame counter. I'll unhook that. 2 screws hold this frame in position. This frame in turn holds the 2 front glasses in position. There's one of the pieces of glass and the other one is still trapped in with this end piece here. So that top cover, that's as stripped down normally as I would strip them down. And you can see this brown crap here on the surface. Now that's probably the remains of something that was tipped on the top of the camera. There was certainly something of a similar nature inside the camera here, but I've cleaned these parts, but it was certainly something showing in here around where the rewind would go. It probably means that something was tipped on the camera, cup of coffee, glass of Coke, something of that nature. It's cleaning away well. At the back here, this is behind the accessory shoe. That's not cleaning as well. It suggests that that's something else has caused that mark. It may almost be a scratch. No, it's not. It's some sort of deposit on the top cover. What it is exactly I can't tell. Something brown. Doesn't bode well, does it? There's a bit of corrosion around that edge there. Oh, it certainly is, and at the back. So it's certainly suffered in the wars. Yeah, that chrome's pretty gone along that edge, and more so at the back. And certainly around that screw hole there for the accessory shoe. So that suggests that some liquid was tipped on the top of the camera, that liquid found its way through those holes and around the front and back of the top cover and sat down in the chrome trim, because the chrome trim sits here. This sits down inside the chrome trim, and that liquid sat in that well around there, and has happily corroded away stuff there. So whatever it was a little bit corrosive. It still doesn't tell me whether it's Coke or coffee. Well, you can hear it as I run that cotton bud along that surface. It runs over those bumps. So here I've just got to get rid of any dust and dirt, old dried grease, anything that's going to cause me a problem really. I'm just checking the action of that frame counter to make sure that it moves smoothly. It does, there's no undue resistance there. Sometimes if a bit of grit gets down inside there, it'll be stiff, and the answer in most cases is to flush it out with some naphtha and keep blowing the naphtha away with a blower, hoping it will carry the particle of grit with it, and usually it does. Excuse me. Sometimes you'll get a counter disc that has one area that's one quadrant that's a bit more dirty or corroded than the rest, and it just means that the camera has sat there for a very long time idle and moisture and dust has settled on that surface and caused problems. Yeah, that's certainly corrosion around here. So the reddy brown mark you can see here, that's the plating of the brass top showing through the chrome at that point. The chrome's gone. And the more you clean it, the redder it will get. It won't get more chrome, it'll get more red. That's usually not a problem in itself. I'm just looking at some of these bumps here to see if they'll move. They don't appear to want to. You get blisters, tiny blisters in the chrome where corrosion has formed underneath it. Of course, removing the blister removes the chrome. That's pretty good. And it's probably as good as I'm going to get that. I've got to clean that glass there. Now there's paint missing around the eyepiece, visible eyepiece hole in there. And the glass is exceptionally dirty. It probably means that whichever contaminant had got in there and caused problems with that corrosion probably also went into the finder at this point. And it's probably loosened that paint up. By swirling the cotton bud around like this, you can actually get quite good coverage. That's good. I'll see if I can clean the outside surface. Well, the glass is nice and clean now, that's good. Something in that corner, what's that? Sometimes it's tricky to see which surface you're working on too. Let's try a new piece of new cotton bud. That's good. Alright. The glass. Well, the glass is pretty grimy. I'll have to clean that and then get that back in place. I'll slide this piece of glass back in place. And fit this in place loosely. It's 2 screws. I won't tighten up its 2 screws. I've got to get the other piece of glass in yet, but it's just as easy to get this in position first. And with the screws loose, put the other piece in position. And it's easier than trying to juggle the frame and the glass all at the same time. Right, so loosen that screw, they're just loose. Yeah. Our other glass lens is right there. Now this sort of sits in a small tray, if you like, in that frame, so once it's in position it tends to stay in position. It's just a bit of an act getting it squared up. That's it, that's in position, and its mate is in position. So I push that forward, do those 2 screws up. That should hold those 2 pieces of glass firmly in place. I'll give them a light clean there to remove that fingerprint I've managed to put on the outside. That's our glass back in place, nice and clean. So that top cover is pretty good. This shoe, look at that brown crap on there. I've got no idea what that stuff was. Let's see if it tends to come away quicker with glass cleaner than the naphtha. It does. That's, yeah, it's definitely some water-based muck. Yeah, I'm tending towards thinking it was a cup of coffee that was spilled on there. I think it would be stickier if it had been Coke. People can tip all manner of contaminants into cameras. When I worked at Kodak, we once had a pocket Instamatic come in that was really crusty and smelled awful. And its tale of woe, because this was returned for repair under guarantee, of course, which was not going to happen. Its tale of woe was that it had been dropped into a pail of milk. Well, I'm not sure how you'd go about finding a pail of milk to tip a camera into, but they certainly had. It was malodorous and not pretty with it. Alright, that's back together. Our top cover is good, ready to go back on a camera. What else have we got here? The rewind knob. I don't normally have to disassemble rewind knobs. It's a bit stiff. The film reminder dial doesn't want to rotate. Let's take this apart. Oh yes, this is, of course, has had the whatever filth was tipped on the top of the camera has been tipped onto this as well. So this part is pretty sticky with it. get that apart. Oh, there's lots of dust and dirt in there too. Okay. Let's try that. Glass cleaner seemed to do a particularly good job of removing that brown crap, so it must be just the right solvent for that filth. And the spring washer is actually in quite good order. It's not even badly corroded. And the screw itself, yeah, that's got the stuff on it too. Right, let's put a little bit of synthetic grease on that wavy washer. Put this together, run the screw back in, tighten it up, check that the film reminder dial can be turned. It can, and it moves nice and smoothly. Right, I'm happy with the state of that. Rangefinder. Better get this stripped apart, I suppose.